I heard the footsteps again last night. Slow, dragging, deliberate. They followed me down the driveway, across the porch, and stopped just inches behind me as I fumbled my keys at the door. And when I finally turned, there was no one there. Only the faint smell of dirt and river water, the same scent that clung to my husband's body when they pulled him out 15 years ago. I haven't told anyone about the footsteps. Not my sister, not my therapist, and definitely not my son. He already thinks his father died a hero. He doesn't know what I told him in anger. He doesn't know the truth I buried under that lie. But I think his father does. And now he's following me. I've never shared any of this, not out loud, not even in a journal. But I'm out of places to hide from what's happening, and maybe saying it will make it real enough for me to finally understand. So before I begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this stay with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue sharing the truths I've carried for years. All right, my name is Marianne Collins, and this happened in a quiet town in northern Tennessee, the kind of place people pass through without remembering a single street name. I raised my son, Ethan, in a plain blue house on Old River Road. Nothing special, just a small home with peeling paint and a backyard big enough for him to chase fireflies in the summer. It was where my husband and I planned to grow old together, though that future was ripped away in a single, stupid accident 15 years ago. At least, that's the version people know. The one I've let them believe. The one I wanted to believe. But guilt is a living thing. It breathes. It waits. And eventually, it comes walking up behind you. The first night I heard the footsteps, I thought it was just my imagination. Stress, exhaustion, maybe even wishful thinking, the kind only loneliness can create. But then they came again, and again, always behind me, always slow, always certain. You know how some people say they can feel a presence? Not see it, not hear it, but feel it, like air thickening around them? That's what it was like for me. A weight settling across my shoulders, as if someone tall was standing right behind me, leaning close, listening. I remember the exact moment the haunting truly began. It wasn't the footsteps. It wasn't the cold spots in the hall. It wasn't even the whisper I thought I heard in the kitchen late one night. No, it began with my son. He had just turned 16. He was angry, restless, hungry for answers I could never give. He asked me, again, how his father died, why he drowned, why someone strong like him couldn't save himself. And I snapped. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was years of holding everything in. Maybe it was the bitterness I still carried from a betrayal I never healed from. But I said something I should never have said. I told my son his father died a coward. I watched the words hit him. I watched them change him. And in that instant, I felt something shift in the air around us, like the house itself took a breath. I didn't mean it. God, I didn't mean it. But the truth is complicated, and pain makes liars of us all. Later that night, after Ethan went to bed, I sat alone in the living room replaying that moment over and over. My hands were still shaking when I heard the first sound. A single step, just outside the window behind me. Then another, and another. Slow, dragging, wet. My heart climbed into my throat. I forced myself to stand and look outside, convinced I'd see a stranger, or maybe a hurt animal wandering the yard. But the yard was empty. The street was still. No wind, no rain, no movement, except, in the dirt just below the porch steps, were footprints. Fresh, deep, pointing toward the house. I didn't sleep a minute that night. Not because I was afraid someone was stalking me, but because I knew that those prints didn't belong to anyone alive. And the footsteps have followed me every night since. Even now, as I tell you this, I can hear them in my memory, that slow, steady rhythm. Not angry, not violent, just patient, as if it's been waiting a long time for me to finally admit what I did. And that's only where this story begins. Before everything fell apart, our life had been painfully ordinary. The kind of quiet, unremarkable existence that feels safe until you lose it and realize how sacred it really was. I met Daniel when I was 23 and working the evening shift at a hardware store. He was the kind of man people liked instantly, soft-spoken, broad-shouldered, with a smile that made you believe he could handle anything life threw at him. We married 2 years later, not because we rushed, but because being with him felt like stepping into a future that was already waiting for us. We didn't have much. A beat-up truck that coughed when it started, a mortgage we could barely afford, and a hand-me-down crib we patched together for our son. But we were happy, or maybe I should say, I believed we were. Back then, my mornings always began the same. I'd wake to the sound of coffee brewing and find Daniel already dressed, leaning against the counter with Ethan in his arms. He'd hand him to me with this look, like he was giving me something fragile and priceless. And I suppose he was. Those early years were good. I clung to that goodness for a long time, even after things started to shift in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. There were small cracks at first. Nights he didn't come home until late. A tightness in his expression when he thought I wasn't looking. A quiet distance between us that felt deliberate. But I ignored all of it. I told myself marriage had phases, that stress did strange things to people, that he still loved me. People don't wake up one morning and stop loving their spouse, not in real life. At least, that's what I believed. One evening, when Ethan was 6, I found Daniel sitting alone in the backyard. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, eyes distant. I asked what was wrong, and he shook his head, saying he just needed some air. I wanted to push, but I didn't. I regret that. I regret a lot of small moments like that, places where I could have asked more, noticed more, demanded more. Marriages don't fall apart in storms. They erode in silence. That silence stretched on for months. Still, despite the tension, there were warm days, good moments. Ethan's school plays, weekend breakfasts, movie nights. When I think about that time now, it feels like looking at old photographs, beautiful, but faint around the edges, as if the memory itself knows it's incomplete. And then, of course, came the accident. The day they told me Daniel had drowned, I didn't believe it. He was too steady, too responsible. He wasn't the kind of man who made careless mistakes near water. And yet, they insisted. He slipped on a wet embankment near the river while clearing brush for a neighbor. It didn't make sense, but I accepted it because grief makes you accept whatever hurts the least. Ethan was only 7. He asked me every night why Daddy didn't come home. And every night, I told him his father was brave, that he tried to help someone and paid the price. That version of events held for years, until Ethan became old enough to ask deeper questions, and until bitterness reshaped the truth into something sharp enough to wound. If I had known what would follow after I let that lie slip into our lives, I never would have spoken it. But back before the haunting began, my days looked painfully ordinary. I worked part-time at the library, organized community events, kept up with Ethan's schoolwork. I worried about bills, about his grades, about the loneliness that crept into the house like a draft. The house itself was nothing special. Small, one story, dim hallways that always felt colder than the rooms around them. Ethan's bedroom door never closed right. The bathroom fan hummed like an old train. And the living room window, where I heard those first footsteps, had a frame that always felt icy, even in summer. But I didn't think of any of that as strange. Not then. The first subtle sign came on a Saturday afternoon in early March. Ethan was at a friend's house, and I was sorting laundry in the hallway. I remember humming softly, lost in my thoughts, until I felt something brush past my left shoulder. Not a breeze, not a draft, not my imagination, just a faint, cold pressure, like someone walking close enough to graze me. I froze, waited, listened, but the house was quiet. Still, I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was nothing, that old homes had their quirks. And when Ethan burst through the front door later that day, loud and energetic, the moment slipped from my mind like a dream after waking. If only I'd paid attention. If only I'd taken that tiny sign seriously. Because that was the beginning. And the house was only just starting to wake up. The first major sign came on a rainy Thursday evening, the kind of night when everything feels heavier than it should. I had just finished washing dishes when I heard Ethan's bedroom door open. His footsteps padded softly down the hallway, and I assumed he was coming to ask about dinner or homework. But when I glanced over my shoulder, the hallway was empty. I frowned, wiped my hands on a towel, and stepped toward his room. "Ethan," I called gently. No answer. His door was cracked open, swaying slightly as though someone had just passed through. I pushed it wider and found the room exactly as he'd left it that morning, backpack tossed on the chair, half-finished sketch on his desk, ceiling fan wobbling lazily. But the air felt wrong. Cooler, thicker, as if someone had just been standing in the center of the room and slipped away the moment I arrived. I backed out slowly and told myself to breathe. Told myself it was nothing. Old hinges, shifting air pressure, logical explanations. But logic is a flimsy thing when your instincts start screaming at you. Later that night, the tapping began. It was faint at first. 3 light taps on the hallway wall, evenly spaced. I remember pausing in the middle of folding laundry, listening. Then came 3 more. Same rhythm, same softness. Tap, tap, tap. I walked into the hallway, heart thudding. The light flickered once overhead. Again, no one was there. That was the first time I felt it, the sensation of being watched. Not from a distance, but close, closer than comfort allows. Like someone leaning over your shoulder in a dark room. I didn't tell Ethan. He was already moody that week, slipping between anger and withdrawal. I didn't want to make him feel unsafe. God, the irony of that hits me now. The next incident happened 2 days later. I'd fallen asleep on the couch after a long shift at the library. The rain outside had settled into a steady lullaby. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound that didn't belong in the room. Breathing. Not mine. Not Ethan's. Slow. Labored. Wet breaths coming from the corner near the window. Every hair on my arms lifted. I didn't move at first. I just listened, afraid that if I shifted even slightly, whatever was there would turn its attention fully toward me. The breathing grew louder, like someone struggling to pull air into waterlogged lungs. Finally, I forced myself upright and turned on the lamp. The corner was empty, but the carpet was damp. A dark, spreading patch no wider than a dinner plate, as though water had dripped steadily from something standing there for a long time. I choked on a gasp and scrambled backward until my spine hit the couch. The wet spot remained, soaking into the fibers. The air smelled faintly of moss and mud. By morning, the patch had dried. No stains, no explanation. And that's when the denial cracked inside me. Something was happening in my home, something I couldn't reason through or ignore. But the worst part was still ahead. 3 nights later, I found a message. It was almost midnight, and I was coming up the stairs with a laundry basket when I noticed a thin line of doubt trailing from the front door to the hallway. Footprints. Bare footprints, darker at the heel, lighter at the toes, leaving smudges of wet soil across the tile. I froze. The prints led down the hall, toward Ethan's room. I dropped the basket and ran. His door was closed. I tried to turn the knob, but something resisted from the inside, just for a second, before giving way. Ethan was asleep, tangled in blankets, breathing softly. No one else. But on the floor beside his bed was a single word, traced in mud. Liar. My knees nearly gave out. I rushed to clean it before he woke, scrubbing until my hands ached. Every stroke of the sponge felt like judgment, like accusation scraped across my conscience. Because the truth was unbearable. I had lied. I'd lied to my son. I'd lied to everyone. And whatever was in that house, whatever had followed those muddy tracks inside, knew exactly what I'd done. The next morning, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. I looked older, smaller, as though something had been carved out of me during the night. But the day marched on, pretending everything was normal, and so did I. Except nothing was normal anymore. Not after the footprints. Not after the word. Not after waking up to the truth pressing against me like cold breath on the back of my neck. And the house was only beginning its accusations. After the mud-scrawled word appeared beside Ethan's bed, the haunting didn't just continue. It evolved. It became deliberate, patterned, purposeful. as though whatever was in the house had found its voice and it intended to use it. The first pattern I noticed was the time. 2:14 a.m. every night. At first, I didn't understand the significance. I would wake up suddenly, heart racing, as though someone had shaken me awake. No dreams, no sounds, just the overwhelming sensation that something was standing at the foot of my bed, watching. The clock would glow 2:14 every single time. The air was always colder at that hour too. Not the kind of cold you feel on your skin, but the kind that sinks into bone, into teeth, into memory. A cold that felt exactly like the river water the night they pulled Daniel out. One night, after waking again at 2:14, I worked up the nerve to walk through the house with a flashlight. I told myself I was being brave, but truthfully, I was desperate. Fear becomes easier to manage when you give it a shape you can name. But the house didn't offer me anything I could name. Only shadows, only silence, until I reached the living room. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied, and in that brief flicker, I saw it, someone standing in front of the window. Tall, still, a silhouette darker than the room around it. I gasped and stumbled backward, the flashlight beam jerking wildly. When I steadied it again, the figure was gone. But the floor beneath the window was wet. Another damp patch, larger this time. I didn't sleep again that night. In the mornings, everything looked normal. Sunlight softened the walls, warming the cold corners. Ethan would shuffle into the kitchen, mumbling about cereal, unaware that the walls had whispered in the night. I tried to shield him from it, from all of it. But the more I hid, the more the house forced itself into the open. A few days later, I found something new. I was putting away towels in the hallway closet when I heard faint tapping again. I froze, listening. This time it wasn't the wall. It was the closet door behind me. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. I opened the door, expecting, hoping, to find a mouse, a loose pipe, something tangible. But instead, on the inside of the door, written in streaks of something dark and smeared, were 4 words. Tell him the truth. I staggered backward, covering my mouth. My first thought was blood, but when I touched it, my fingers came back muddy, earthy, cold, exactly like the footprints. The truth, that was the message. That was the anger. And that was the moment it clicked. This haunting wasn't random. It wasn't a generic spirit lingering for attention or closure. It was targeted, focused, rooted in the lie I had told my son, the lie that festered between us like rut. Over the next week, the evidence piled up. Almost every morning I found dirt on the floors, thin drags of it, like something heavy had been pulled slowly across the hallway. My keys disappeared twice and reappeared in the same place, on Daniel's old toolbox in the attic. A toolbox I hadn't touched in years. And the whispers began. Not loud, not clear, just faint threads of sound drifting through the rooms when the house was otherwise silent. The kind of whispers you strain to hear even though you already know you shouldn't. Sometimes they sounded like my name, sometimes like the rustle of clothing underwater. But one night, I heard the clearest whisper of all, low, pained, strained through waterlogged lungs. Why did you lie? I clapped my hands over my ears, eyes wide, heart hammering. I felt the sound more than heard it, felt it vibrate along my spine. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because the truth was a wound-eyed stitch shut so tightly that opening it again felt impossible. The lowest point came when Ethan finally noticed something was wrong. He came into the kitchen after school, dropped his backpack, and said, "Mom, someone was in my room again." I nearly dropped the plate in my hands. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He shrugged uneasily. My window was open, and my sketchbook was moved. I didn't leave it like that. The look in his eyes broke me, confusion first, then suspicion, as though he wondered whether I was the one sneaking around his room. I wanted to deny everything, to reassure him, to promise the house was safe. But the lie stuck in my throat like a stone. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed long after Ethan had gone to sleep. I stayed at the clock as the numbers shifted. 2:13, 2:14. Right on time, the temperature dropped. The door to my bedroom creaked open. I didn't turn toward it. I didn't breathe. A single wet footprint appeared on the wooden floor, then another and another. Slow, approaching. My lowest point wasn't fear. It was knowing exactly who the footsteps belonged to, and knowing that the truth, the real truth, was coming for me whether I was ready or not. At some point, fear transforms. It stops being sharp and frantic and starts settling into something colder, something steadier. When you've been afraid long enough, the terror becomes familiar. It stops controlling you and begins shaping you instead. That's what happened to me. After weeks of waking at 2:14 a.m., of muddy messages and footprints and whispers, something shifted inside me. Not bravery, not exactly. More like resignation. A quiet understanding that whatever haunted my home wasn't going to stop. Not until I stopped running from the truth. And so I made a choice. I would confront it. I would confront him. I started with the river. It had been years since I'd visited the place where Daniel drowned. I always avoided it, choosing detours on the road just to keep the water out of sight. But now I needed answers, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a memory tugged at me, something subtle, something unfinished. The riverbank was quiet when I arrived, the water sluggish and dark. The trees leaned overhead like they were eavesdropping. I stood there for a long time, listening to the current, wondering how much it remembered. A cold breeze rippled across the surface, stirring a scent I recognized instantly, damp earth and algae, the same scent that followed me home at night. I whispered into the wind, "I know you're here." Nothing moved. No voice answered. But I felt a shift in the air around me, as if the river itself held its breath. I closed my eyes and let the memory play. The day they told me he died. The neighbor's account. Daniel clearing brush near the embankment. Slipping. Falling. But that wasn't the whole story. Not even close. The truth, the part one never told Ethan, was that Daniel hadn't simply slipped. He'd been drinking. He'd been struggling for months, weighed down by secrets I didn't fully uncover until after he was gone. Financial mistakes. A hidden injury. A letter I found tucked behind his dresser months after his death. A letter from another woman. I never knew whether he had been unfaithful or simply confiding in someone during his lowest point. But the letter shattered something in me. And by the time Ethan grew old enough to ask questions, bitterness had blurred grief into something uglier. I didn't call him a coward because I believed it fully. I called him a coward because I felt abandoned, because he left me with a son to raise alone, with questions I couldn't bear to answer, with the humiliation of knowing parts of his life had been hidden from me. I whispered into the wind again. "I'm sorry." A ripple moved across the water, just one, but no more answers came. Still, standing there, I made a decision. If the haunting wanted the truth, then I needed to prepare to face it. Back home, I moved through the house with new eyes. I took note of the cold spots, mapped the places where dirt appeared most often, paid attention to where the whispers were strongest. Patterns emerged. The hallway, the living room window, Ethan's bedroom doorway, and always, the sound of footsteps behind me instead of ahead. Like he didn't want to confront me directly, like he wanted me to come to him. So I began planning. I researched cleansing rituals, not because I believed all of them, but because intention matters. I bought candles, salt, sage bundles. I cleaned the house top to bottom, a deep scrubbing that felt more like penance than preparation. I also started keeping a journal, writing down every incident, every whisper, every footprint. Writing brought clarity. It forced me to acknowledge the haunting not as random chaos, but as communication. One entry in particular stood out. "He isn't trying to hurt me. He's trying to force me to tell the truth." That realization steadied me, angered me, even. "I will tell him," I whispered into the empty kitchen one night. But on my terms. Emotionally, I wasn't ready. Not for Ethan. Not for the ghost. Not for myself. Every time I pictured sitting my son down and telling him what I'd done, what I'd lied about, my stomach tightened painfully. The lie had protected him for years. It had shaped his image of his father. And correcting it, breaking that illusion, felt like tearing out the last thread holding us together. But what choice did I have? The haunting wasn't stopping. The nights weren't getting quieter. And the message was clear. I couldn't keep carrying this secret. As I planned, dread grew alongside determination. Because every step forward felt like stepping deeper into something waiting for me. Something heavy and ancient and tied to the river. The house responded, too. Shadows clung longer in corners. Doors breathed open and shut. My name whispered from places that should not hold voices. But instead of running from it, I found myself listening, preparing, steeling myself. The night I lit the first candle, I felt a presence settle in the hallway. Not anger, not rage. Something closer to anticipation. And when I finally said aloud, "Tomorrow night, I'll tell him," the temperature in the room dropped so sharply that the flame trembled. I had made my choice, and whatever walked in my footsteps was ready for the confrontation. The night I chose for the confrontation arrived thick with humidity, the kind that makes walls feel closer and air feel heavier. Even Ethan noticed something was different. He hovered near me during dinner, glancing toward the darkened hallway every few minutes as though expecting someone to appear. "Mom, you okay?" he finally asked. I forced a small smile. "Just tired. Go ahead and get some sleep soon." "All right." He nodded, though he clearly didn't believe me. After he went to his room, a quiet dread settled over the house, stretching into every corner, settling into every crack. The air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. When the clock reached 2 a.m., I sat in the living room with a single candle lit in front of me. No more hiding, no more denial. The truth was waiting, and so was he. At 2:14, the wind outside abruptly stopped. No rustling, no tapping against the windows, just stillness. Then the footsteps began. Not faint, not distant, right outside the front door. Heavy, slow, waterlogged. Each step landed with a dull thud, as though dripping mud onto the porch. I sat frozen, staring at the door as the footsteps crossed the threshold without it opening. The boards creaked under a weight I couldn't see. I whispered, "Daniel, please." The candle flickered violently, its flame bending toward me as though pushed by a sudden breath. The footsteps moved closer. One step into the room, another, and another. Then they stopped directly behind me. The air tightened, squeezing the breath out of my chest. The scent of river water filled my lungs, damp, murky, metallic. Cold radiated down my spine, seeping into my bones. I couldn't turn around. I wasn't sure I'd survive seeing what stood there. His voice came next, not through air, through the walls, the floor, the space inside my skull. A strained whisper, "Tell him." I swallowed hard. "I will. I promise. But you can't keep terrifying him. He's just a boy." A low sound answered, something between a groan and a sob, distorted by water. The candle flame bent again, shrinking, as if smothered by a hand I couldn't see. I felt a pressure at my back. Not a touch, just weight. As though he leaned close, inches from my skin. This was my moment, the one I had prepared for. I forced myself to speak. "You didn't die a coward," I whispered. "But you didn't die a hero either. You were lost. You were struggling. And I didn't see it. I didn't help you." The pressure behind me grew heavier. My breath shook. "I lied to our son because I didn't want him to know the worst parts of you. Or the worst parts of me." The candle flame snapped sideways, extinguished in an instant. Darkness swallowed the room. I gasped, scrambling blindly, but the air turned freezing. My skin prickled as something brushed past my arm, wet, cold, unmistakably human. I felt him move around me, circling. Slow, deliberate. Then the footsteps stopped in front of me. A shape formed in the darkness, barely visible, more suggestion than form. Taller than I remembered, shoulders bowed, head lowered. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. His outline flickered with every shift of lightning outside the window, as though he existed only in brief flashes. His face was shadowed, but I could make out the dripping water trailing from where his chin might have been, hitting the floorboards with soft taps. Tap, 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 like the river was still reclaiming him piece by piece. A whisper seeped from the figure. You let him believe I was weak. The words rattled inside the room, vibrating through the floor. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might burst. I know, I choked. I know. And I'm sorry. I've been sorry for years. The air pulsed, as if the figure tensed. But you left us, I whispered. Lightning flashed, bright, violent, and for one split second, I saw his face. Bloated, blue-lipped, eyes open. I screamed. The room plunged into darkness again. The figure surged closer, and icy air smashed against me. My breath froze mid-inhale. I stumbled backward, falling onto my hands. Pain shot up my wrists. The voice, his voice, rose in a ragged cry. Tell him. The walls groaned. The floorboards shuddered. The window panes rattled like they were about to explode. I covered my ears, shaking uncontrollably. I will. I yelled. Please, stop. I'll tell him everything. The house fell silent instantly. No footsteps, no whispers, no movement, only the sound of my own sobbing. Slowly, the room warmed. The scent of river water faded. The pressure lifted, leaving me hollow and trembling. The figure was gone, but something remained, a thin trail of muddy footprints leading down the hallway, straight to Ethan's room. I staggered to my feet, heart slamming in my chest as I followed the prints. I reached his doorway and froze. Inside, in the faint glow of his nightlight, Ethan was sitting upright in bed, eyes wide, hands clenched, staring at something only feet from him. Before I could speak, I saw it. A single, wet footprint appearing beside his bed, forming right in front of him. The haunting wasn't finished. Not yet. Ethan didn't scream when he saw the footprint appear beside his bed. He didn't lunge for me or cry or ask what was happening. He just sat there, rigid, trembling, his eyes fixed on the empty space inches in front of him. I rushed to him, pulling him into my arms. His skin was cold with fear. Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. Something was here. I held him tighter. I know, baby. I'm here now. The air in the room was heavy, but no longer freezing. Whatever presence had loomed beside him moments earlier had receded, leaving only the smell of river mud, faint but undeniable. I closed the door behind us, as if that thin piece of wood could keep anything out. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the edge of his bed, one hand resting on his back as he drifted in and out of a fitful, exhausted sleep. Every time he stayed, I flinched, afraid the footprints would appear again. They didn't. The house stayed eerily still, but the stillness wasn't comforting. It felt like the breath someone holds right before they demand an answer. The next morning, sunlight finally broke through the clouds. It stretched across the hallway in warm bars, cutting through the memory of the night. The house seemed calm, normal even, but I knew better. The footprints had dried to faint outlines. The smell was nearly gone, but the sense of pressure, of expectation, lingered. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, quiet, pale, tapping his fingers in a nervous rhythm. I made him toast he barely touched. I poured coffee I didn't drink. Finally, he asked, Mom, what's going on? His voice wasn't angry this time, not frustrated, just tired, scared. For the first time in years, I didn't scramble for a lie. Ethan, I said softly, I need to tell you something about your father. He stiffened. I saw the tension rise in his shoulders, the fear of the unknown. That fear, created by the lie I'd planted, was mine to fix. I sat across from him and told him everything. Not all at once. Not violently. Not like a confession being dragged out of me by the dark corners of our home. Slowly, carefully, honestly. I told him his father hadn't died bravely or cowardly, just tragically. I told him about the drinking, about the stress Daniel hid from us, about the letter I'd found and the hurt it caused, about the anger I'd swallowed until it twisted into bitterness. And then I told him the part that mattered most. I called him a coward because I was hurting, not because it was the truth. Ethan stared at me for a long time, jaw tight, eyes bright with confusion. So, he wasn't a bad man, he asked finally. No, I whispered. He was a good man who made mistakes, and I'm sorry I ever made you think otherwise. Silence filled the room. He looked down, tears sliding quietly down his cheeks. I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. We stayed like that for several minutes, both mourning something different, both trying to rebuild something fragile. When Ethan finally stood, he whispered, "I wish you told me sooner." "I deserve that." I nodded. "I know." He didn't walk away angry. He just hugged me, tight, sudden, trembling. The kind of hug that felt like it came from a child much younger. And as he pressed his forehead against my shoulder, I felt a breeze move through the room. Soft, brief, almost warm. I looked over his shoulder. A single footprint was forming on the tile floor near the back door. But this one was faint, barely visible. No mud, no dripping water. More like an outline made by air rather than ice. Then another appeared, and another, leading toward the doorway. Not into the house, but out of it. Ethan didn't see. His eyes were closed, face pressed against my shirt. I watched the footprints fade one by one, dissolving like mist until only the sunlight remained. When the last one vanished, the pressure in the room lifted completely. The cold spots faded. The house breathed, its first true breath in weeks. It was over. Or at least, the haunting was. The grief wasn't. The guilt wasn't. The lie wasn't magically erased. But the presence that had shadowed me, followed me, demanded the truth. It felt gone. Not banished, not defeated, simply released. Because the truth had finally been spoken. Days passed before I stopped jumping at small noises. Weeks passed before I slept through the night again. But gradually, the house felt like mine. Ethan changed too. He grew quieter for a time, thoughtful, processing everything with a seriousness far beyond his age. Sometimes I caught him staring out the window at the yard, as though imagining a father he finally had permission to understand honestly. We didn't talk about the haunting, not directly, but the distance between us shrank. The silence healed. Every morning, the first thing I did was step into the hallway and breathe deeply, testing the air. No cold, no mud, no footsteps, just stillness, just peace. For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched. But I carried the memory of those nights with me, not out of fear, but as a reminder of what secrets can become when left to rot in the dark. A reminder of the footsteps that followed me home, until I finally turned around and faced them. In the months that followed, life didn't return to what it once was because it couldn't, but it settled into something steadier, something more honest. The haunting ended, yet the aftermath lingered quietly in the corners of my everyday routine. Not in a supernatural way, but in small, human ways. When I reached for the light switch in the hallway, I still hesitated a moment. When I walked past the living room window at night, I sometimes felt the memory of a presence standing there. Not watching, just remembering. But the fear no longer owned me. It had softened into something bittersweet, an echo instead of a threat. Ethan and I grew closer in a way I didn't expect. There was an openness between us now, a willingness to ask harder questions, to sit with uncomfortable truths. He didn't bring up his father often, but when he did, it was gentler. Curious, not angry. One afternoon, we were driving back from the grocery store when he asked, almost casually, "If Dad were here, what do you think he'd say to us now?" The question caught me off guard. For a second, I saw the mud on the floor again, the wet footprints, the river-soaked silhouette looming in the darkness. But the memory no longer froze me. "I think," I said slowly, choosing each word with care, "he'd want us to live our lives without being weighed down by who he was or what he did. I think he'd want us to forgive him, and to forgive each other." Ethan looked out the window, nodding. He didn't say anything more. He didn't have to. That silence between us, the one that had once been sharp with resentment, felt softer now. Healing. The house stayed calm after that. The nights were just nights again. The hallway was only a hallway. I stopped waking at 2:14 a.m. Or rather, I stopped waking in fear. The truth had been spoken. The wound had been opened, cleaned, allowed to breathe. Some nights, though, I still found myself sitting quietly in the living room, remembering the way the candle flickered the moment the presence entered the room. I remembered the frozen air, the whispered words, the crushing pressure of guilt taking physical form. And I realized something important. The haunting wasn't punishment. It wasn't revenge. It was unfinished grief, his, mine, and Ethan's. Grief that needed a voice, a witness, a confession. Once the truth was finally shared, the presence didn't need to linger anymore. We both, on opposite sides of life and death, were finally able to let go. There is a moment, months later, that stays with me more than anything else. I was in the backyard planting new flowers, something I hadn't done since before Daniel died. The soil was warm, the sun bright, and I felt a rare kind of peace. When I stood up to stretch, I noticed Ethan watching me from the back porch. "You look happier," he said softly. I smiled. "I feel lighter." He stepped down from the porch and took a few hesitant steps toward me. "Do you ever think he still, I don't know, checks on us?" The ground felt steady beneath my feet as I answered. "Maybe in a way," I said, "but not like before. Not the way that scared us. I think if he's still around at all, it's only to make sure we're okay, not to remind us of the past." Ethan nodded slowly, accepting that in a way only someone who has lived through truth and terror side by side can. We stood in silence for a moment. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead, carrying the scent of river water, but faint, gentle, nothing like the suffocating cold that used to follow me. For the first time, I didn't flinch. Instead, I whispered, "Thank you," under my breath. Not to ask for anything, not to push anything away, but simply to acknowledge the journey we'd survived. The breeze shifted, as though answering, and then passed. In the end, what I learned was simple. A secret doesn't disappear just because you bury it. A lie doesn't protect someone, it only protects your fear. And guilt, left untended, becomes its own haunting. You can't outrun the truth. You can only face it, speak it, and let it reshape what comes next. I used to think the footsteps that followed me home were the start of a nightmare. Now I understand they were the beginning of a reckoning I had needed for years. A reckoning that saved my relationship with my son. A reckoning that freed a spirit that had lingered too long. A reckoning that forced me to open the door I'd been terrified of for half my life. And if there is any moral in all of this, any final truth, it's this. The things we hide in darkness don't stay there. Eventually, they learn to walk. And they follow us until we finally turn around and face them. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels.